Over to Ian. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Good morning. Hello. Can you hear me at the back? Do you want to hear me at the back? All right, okay. I should start by way of introduction, almost a sort of disclaimer. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ian, and I'm certainly not a pastor or a preacher. So if it's first time here, don't go away thinking, oh, that was a terrible sermon. So this isn't what you usually get. Tony asked if I could just spend a few minutes talking about, or giving my story, my Christian story really, and in Christian terms that's called giving your testimony, and also just to talk about the sort of things we do here on the island now. So I was born at a very early age, in 1947. I was born into I think very favoured circumstances, very poor but favoured because I had a good family, and I had a stable family and a house and everything else. And I had a father who used to talk about God, although he never really went to church or anything like that, but he always talked about God, and it was sort of probably ingrained in me. And I remember at my earliest memory when I was about 12, going out for a run one morning, which is unusual for a 12-year-old, I know, but I was quite a sort of athletic child. And I went out for a run and came home, and I was convinced that I'd had some kind of experience of the other, something beyond what I could see. I was convinced that there was something out there. And that was my earliest spiritual experience, I guess, really. I was sent to Sunday school, I guess, to get me out of the way. I never really learnt very much, but I had to go to and sang in the choir. So I was choir morning and night, Sunday school in the afternoon. I sang in the choir because we got paid 2 and 6 a month. And that's 12.5 pence for some people who don't remember those days. But that was great, I enjoyed it, but it didn't mean very much to me, I must say. I was very taken with creation. I used to look at things and wonder where it came from, and I'm sure many of you have done the same thing. You look, where did all this come from? And I was a collector of oddball facts, and one oddball fact really put me in mind of the psalmist when he said the heavens proclaim the glory of God. And this wonderful fact I learnt some time ago is if you pick up a handful of sand, and the number of grains of sand in your hand represents the number of stars you can see approximately on a clear night, especially on the Isle of Wight. That's the number of grains of sand. So you think, and someone told me, how many handfuls do you think you have to take to represent the number of stars in the known universe? Would anyone like to guess? Well, the answer is every grain of sand on every beach in the whole world. That's the number of stars in the known universe. And if that doesn't blow your socks off when you think about it again. It's astonishing, isn't it? And that's in the known universe. So the heavens proclaim the glory of God. Incidentally, Tony tells me if after 18 minutes the shepherd's hook comes and grabs me off the stage, so I'll try not to go on too much. In 1971, I managed to get to university against all the odds. Who knows? But anyway, I got to university and I had a fabulous 6 years. I really enjoyed it. I love studying. And at university, I was able to study things like anatomy and physiology and biochemistry, all those sort of super things. And again, the psalmist comes to mind, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And that really became real to me. And I sort of started looking at how we're made. You tease apart. I spent 1.5 years dissecting a body with 3 other people. We took it apart in every nerve. And I thought, where on earth does this come from? And I started learning about things like DNA. And I'm not sure we've all heard of DNA, but DNA is little packets of information that's crammed into ourselves and makes us who we are. It's a chemical. And then someone told me that if you string all the DNA in your body, or my body, together, the whole lot of it, it reached the sun and back 600 times. Well, how astonishing is that? And that's all information packed in there. And the idea that this came from nowhere never really came across my horizon in those days. And at that time, I came across an evangelistic group in the halls of residence called the Navigators. And there was a newly converted actor called James Fox, who was amongst them. Anybody remember James Fox? Yeah? And he's a lovely man, and he came knocking on my door. Oh, James Fox. Oh. Anyway, the bottom line is I listened to what they had to say, and I became convinced of what they had to say. I believed that there was a creator God. I'd already got that far. And I believed that we were given free will, and that we'd misused our free will, and that misuse of free will had separated us from God, both in this life and the next. I became convinced of that. I became convinced that Jesus, by his life and teaching, told us how to live, and then by his death and resurrection gave us a route back to God. And that all made sense to me, and I believed it. I believe that Jesus was a real person, and if anybody doubts that, read the accounts of Jewish historian Josephus or Tacitus, a Roman historian, people who lived at the same time as Jesus. They wrote down about his life. And if you want something a bit more modern, look at Lee Strobel. He wrote a book called The Case for Christ. He was an investigative journalist who was desperate to disprove Christ. Desperate because his wife had become a Christian. He was an ardent atheist, and he hated the fact she'd become a Christian. He set out to disprove the whole thing. And he spent a year, 2 years, or even longer researching, and he eventually came to the conclusion that Christ was a real person and that he was who he said he was. So the last thing on that little bit was I became convinced of the resurrection of Jesus as a real event. It's been described as the best attested, the best proven event in ancient history. And Lord Denning, the previous Lord Chief Justice in the UK, he said no intelligent jury in the world, if presented with this information, this evidence, would deny the evidence that this was true, that Jesus' resurrection was true. Now, having said all that, I went my merry way, got into life and bringing up a family and everything else. And to my shame, I think I became a bit too clever for my own, too big for my own boots. I thought somehow this message was too easy, it was too pat. And I thought there must be more complex things out there. And I started looking, I thought, oh, there must be deeper things here. I started thinking enlightenment's the way forward. So I looked at all sorts of things. I looked at Hinduism, I looked at Buddhism, I looked at yoga, I looked at Zen, I looked at Zoroastrianism. Anything you want, I looked at it. And I set off on this futile search. But that was where I was. And perhaps some of you have been there as well. I also became disillusioned and disenchanted with religion. I hated the hypocrisies I saw in the churches I attended. I didn't like Christians very much, I have to say. And I hadn't by then learnt the truism that you must keep your eyes off Christians and on Christ. Coming to the church to the roundabouts did be a different matter, but that's for later. There's the old aphorism, when you're in the hole, stop digging. So it was all head knowledge, really. And I spent years and years in and out of this church, that church, this ashram, that ashram. Oh, I was all over the place, still making a living and still remaining fairly sane and such like. But I was on this quest, which wasn't going anywhere at all. I found a sort of spiritual refuge in Quakerism, and I was with them for, 20 odd years or wherever, but you can really believe anything in Quakerism. It's okay, you just have to be a nice person. And I gave up in the end. I just gave it all up. I thought, this is too much, I can't do it. I just gave it all up. And then one day I went on a dog walk, the fateful dog walk, and I declared myself an atheist. This for a year, 2 years, I can't remember, a bleak period in my life. But I went on the dog walk, as I did every day with our 2 dogs, and just in the middle of the woods, I found myself praying. And that might sound such a trite thing, but for me it was almost like a road to Damascus experience. Somehow it was like he got hold of my shoulders and turned me around and said, not that way, this is the way you need to go. And I realized I just had to get rid of this quest, get rid of the rubbish that had been in my life, all the ideas and the false ideas, and commit myself wholeheartedly for the rest of my life to Jesus Christ. By various routes, I found the church on the roundabout, and in a way, the rest is history. But I was baptized in December 2016. What a wonderful day. So that's me. That's where I'm at the moment. I've been a member of this congregation for a short time, really, a couple of years maybe, or thereabouts. So moving on to where I am now, I retired 4 years ago at the age of 67. I know, you can't believe it, can you? But there you go. And I wanted to do something. I'd always been in caring professions all my life. And one thing that I had that came to me when I first became a Christian was compassion. I've always had compassion, a great deal of compassion. I see people hurting. I always want to do something. And that's not me. You know, that's God in me. That's not me at all. But I have this compassion. So leaving work at the hospice, I tried to find something that would be fulfilling in retirement, and I trained and worked for the Citizens Advice for a while, and I trained and worked for Samaritans at the same time. Both wonderful organisations, but both secular organisations. And I had this inner knowing that I really needed to do something directly for God. I wanted to be overtly Christian in my approach. I wanted to be able to pray with people. I wanted to be able to talk to people about God if they wanted to. And you can't do that in CAB and Samaritans, it's just not on. And it's a friend of mine, Tim, who works at the food bank here, said we really need people at the food bank, so I started working at the food bank a year or two back. I can't remember how long ago it was. And it's a wonderful organisation, it's been just fabulous. For those of you who don't know, the food bank is an offshoot of something called the Trussell Trust, which was set up in 1996 by a couple of people, Paddy and Carol Henderson. They were working in Bulgaria at the time in 96, and they were looking after street children with the UN food programme. And with some money that Carol got from her grandmother, I think, Mrs. Trussell, which is where the money came from, they set up a trust in the UK to raise money to feed these street children in Bulgaria. And she was then challenged by a lady from Salisbury who said, well, this is all very well what you're doing, but my children are going to sleep hungry tonight. What are you going to do about this? It's in Salisbury. And that's how the food bank came about. In 2000, she set up the first food bank working from they set up the first food bank working from a shed, a garden shed in Salisbury. And it's grown from there. Now it's this huge, great nationwide organisation. Christian organisation helps people who need food in a crisis who don't have it. And some of you have worked in food bank and had association with it. I just think it's a great organisation because you're able to enable other people to share, people in the wider community who may not have a Christian bias but have compassion themselves, put money and they put food and such like in collecting places, and we're able to distribute this and to share freely in a non-judgmental way. And when people come in here, they very often come in embarrassed, sometimes broken, sometimes frightened, sometimes just very, very fearful, and we're able to be alongside them and provide them with physical food, but also with psychological and, more importantly, spiritual food. So we're able to talk about God openly, if they want to do, without proselytizing. So that's wonderful. And the food bank in the church here is on Wednesday and Friday mornings, led by Tony. And I think it's one of the busiest on the island. There are 5 other food banks on the island now. But here we run it as a cafe, and lots of people here, and John and Jenny and Beth, and lots of people here involved in it. And it's just a lovely place to be. So if anybody's interested in doing that, then Tony would love to speak to them, I'm sure. The other thing I got involved in a little while ago was the chaplaincy team at St Mary's. And again, that's just a fantastic... I think my interest in that was piqued because I was a patient myself and spent a little bit of time in hospital a year or two back. Not long. But any of you who've been in hospital will know that it's a lonely place. If you're feeling vulnerable, no one really comes to talk to you in hospital. Nurses come round and they'll empty your catheter bag, or whatever it might be, take your blood pressure, or wake you up for your sleeping pill, you know, something like that. But no one really comes and sits down and says, hello, how are you? I've come to see how you are. How are you feeling? You know, how are you being treated here? What's the matter? You know, have you been frightened by this? That sort of thing. And I was given the opportunity to work with that team. There are other people in the congregation. Laura works with the team, don't you, Laura? Where's Laura? She's gone. Yeah, there you go. So there are about 40 volunteers up there. Many of the people are involved in wheeling patients down to the chapel and looking after them for the Sunday service. Other people like myself are what are called listening volunteers. So we go around to specific wards and we just go around and see people, talk to them, talk to members of staff, listen about their problems at home, listen about their own illnesses and such like. And we're just generally there, hopefully, to be a beacon of God's presence. So if people want to know about God, very happy to talk with them. If they want prayer, we're happy to pray with them. If they want to talk about football, I'm not your man, but but I can talk about motorbikes and I can talk about lots of other things, but not football, Tony, sorry. I draw the line there. I can listen, that's right. So it's about listening. And so I guess that brings me to the last, one of the things I've learned here is that praise and worship is wonderful, but praise and worship and prayer are a two-way process. So we have to listen to God and as well as speak to God. And the verse that comes to mind is from Samuel, where it says, Lord, you know, speak, Lord, for your servant listeneth. For most of us, it's listen, Lord, for your servant speaking. Yeah. And I'm reminded, just to finish with, it's the little piece from C.S. Lewis, who was a very famous atheist turned Christian, one of the most important Christian writers, perhaps of the 20th century, who said, my mind's gone blank, Christianity, if not true, is of no importance. But if Christianity is true, it's of utmost importance. What it can't be is of moderate importance. So that's my story. Thank you.